All right, with that in mind, let's review a little bit. Somebody tell me something of significance about the colonial legislatures. Stephanie. Okay, yeah, same structure basically, bicameral, that upper and lower house. Anything else?
The lower house was represented by the common people, and they
Okay.
had more of a say.
Okay, yeah, the lower house is more powerful, and it represented the common people. Colonial governors, were they typically more powerful or less powerful than the lower house or the legislature in general? Same. Saying more? What's that?
They were more powerful. They had the right to veto stuff.
Okay, yeah, but we qualified that. He's saying more powerful, which is true on paper. There's some extremely important powers, but there was a Gregory.
He was very powerful, but the lower class basically dictated what he would do.
How?
As in, they have everything he does, he has to run it through the.
Okay, Caleb?
The lower house also gave them his wages and stuff like that. So
Yeah. Yeah, the lower house controlled taxing and spending, and that again, it was a political fight, but very usually that lower house would win the day because of that. So, okay. Why did we need a Great Awakening? Something a little more descriptive than they were cold darnel. That's darnel is the combination of carnal and dead. They were darnel. Cold, carnal, and dead Christians. A little more meat than that. Yes.
The church and state have been combined.
Okay, combined church and state. That always produces dead Christianity. Yeah.
The unconverted church members.
Okay, unsaved church members. That's pretty cold and dead. And one more, even more cold and dead.
Unconverted ministers.
Yeah, ministers that weren't saved. It was just literally, it was a nice job. You know, what do you want to be when you grow up? Well, I was thinking about engineer, but if I become a minister, there's less work. You know, it was a nice job, that type of thing. All right, and we talked about the things starting 30s and 40s primarily there, and looked at some of the famous men. And then some of the results beyond the spiritual results, people getting saved. And then we start into mercantilism. All right, what should come to mind? Think mercantilism, what comes to mind? Michael?
Political control
Okay.
of the economy.
Political control over the economy. That's at the heart of it, okay? There swirling around that are different ideas, and those ideas change somewhat when you go to different countries or different time frames within this general era. But at the heart of it is political control. That was there. All right. We talked about a couple of those other ideas underneath the definition. Only measuring gold and silver. When you talk about how wealthy a nation is, it's only the gold and silver that they possess. We talked about wealth being fixed. There's only a certain amount of wealth, and if one person gets wealthy, it means they took it from other people, which is a false premise. Okay. We talked about some general mercantilistic practices, balance of trade. Can someone tell me what that is? A favorable balance of trade. They push to have this favorable balance of trade. Not flavorful. Right. That's when you go to Albany's Candy Factory and you have a flavorful balance of trade. So, Joanna?
When you sell more to another country than you buy.
Okay, you sell more than they buy from you. Okay. What's the error in that analysis here? The mercantilists, or their argument is, if you're selling more to them, then you're getting wealthier because the money's coming your way. You know, there's more money coming your way than is going out, so you're becoming wealthy. What's the error in the thinking? Anybody on this half, other than Caleb and Gregory? You already answered. You already answered too, I guess. Nobody? We have the silent quarter back there.
Just because you sell $1 million worth of product and you still have to account for the product that you sold.
Yes.
even though you gave more money.
They never take into account the actual products being transferred back and forth. You get $1 million from somebody, but you give them $1 million worth of stuff. Right? They don't track that. By mercantilistic thinking, We should all be impoverished because of Walmart. Okay, really, think of your negative balance of trade with Walmart. They've never bought a thing from me, but I do buy stuff from them. All right, and really, we don't. The same thing is true. You don't walk into Walmart, well, maybe you do, but let's pretend that you're buying something that's worth buying. You don't walk in there and think, man, I'm going to walk out of here and I'll be $100 lighter. You walk in thinking, I'm going to walk in here and I'm going out with 500 rounds of 9mm ammo. and I give up $100 to walk out with that ammo, and it's cheaper than you can buy anywhere else. So anyway, I'm happy and they're happy. It's not a net loss. We're both happy. So anyway, by that balance of trade, you should be fighting fervently to have any business that you do business with, buy things from, to also buy things from you. Try that. The gas station where you fill up. I'm not sure what you sell them, but you need to sell them something to offset this balance of trade. All right, so balance of trade, that one, it's still around. All right, so really, if you're completely confused and don't understand it, I wouldn't mind taking a question, but it's still around. We still track this balance of trade, and it's just as faulty today to track it as it was back then. All right, promotion of manufacturing. Let me back up. There is a sliver of truth in this balance of trade that we need to be able to produce things in our own country in times of war. Right? If we get to the point where we have no manufacturing in our country and we go to war, that is a problem. Right? But we're not anywhere near that. So if someone says, oh, well, we got to fight this balance of trade for war, and just say, okay, it's like saying, we've got to, we can't put helium in our car tires because the cars might float. Right? We're not anywhere near that. Okay, so it's a consideration so far down the road that it really doesn't even enter the equation right now. So anyway, there is that. There's a small truth to that, but we're not anywhere near that. So, all right, balance of trade, promotion, manufacturing, shipping, and planting colonies. Those, at least in my notes, I just have described as some practices, some general things that were done. The next thing I want to do is look at some particular laws, specific laws that were passed to give us an idea here of how sometimes these basic practices were tried to be implemented. So, all right, so some examples of laws, and I've got this split up into two pieces. We'll look at some laws that come out of England, some British laws, and then the other half will be some colonial laws that were passed that were mercantilistic in nature. All right, a couple out of England, just to give us some examples. The first one is the Navigation Act of 1651. This is the first real mercantilistic law applied towards the colonies. Navigation Act, anybody guess what it dealt with? Navigation, that was shipping and trading. Okay, that was at the heart of it was shipping, trying to control how the shipping was done. It regulated or mandated things like this. Any goods being carried to the colonies had to be on a British-owned ship with a majority British crew. All right, so if the French wanted to ship something into the colonies, they had to contact or somehow coordinate with a British merchant and use their ship as well as have the majority of the crew be British. They couldn't just put a bunch of French sailors on and send it over. So anything going to the colonies, British ship, majority British crew. 51. 1651, yeah. There are multiple navigation acts if you might see other years, but this is the first one. So. All right, so regulations like that about the shipping. Eventually in time, some of the other navigation acts mandate that any goods going to the colonies have to stop in England first. They have to go to England, be unloaded off the ship that they were on into one of the warehouses in England, and then loaded back up and shipped over to America. So the rules change, but this Navigation Act is aimed at shipping. Can anybody figure out how in the world that would fit into a mercantilistic idea? What were they aiming at there? Some of these might scratch your head, and sometimes I do. What were they thinking? But Okay, they did want the trade to be centered with the colonies, and we wanted to at least make sure that any of the profit from the shipping ends up in England. They didn't want the French to benefit from the shipping, trying to funnel their money back to England. So,
They also wanted to control the amount of money they spent.
so what's that?
They also want to control the amount of money they spend. Like if the French wanted to sell something, some product, they wanted to control how much money was being spent.
On that. Okay. There weren't at this point direct laws about that yet. So, okay. So Navigation Act. There were multiples of those through the years that all did that type of thing. So, all right. 3 more examples here. The Staple Act. Oh, actually, I got ahead of myself. This one's 1663. Staple Act. This said that anything coming from mainland Europe had to go through England first. So if you were buying some German bratwurst, it had to ship to England and then to the colonies. It couldn't come directly there. Again, another example is the Woolens Act, 1669. This dealt with wool. And what this said was that the colonies could not export wool or any wool products. You couldn't take the raw wool and ship it out, or you couldn't make sweaters and stuff like that and then ship them out. So no wool or wool products could be exported out of the colonies. Now this is mercantilistic from the British mindset. What's that?
Why would they not let them export?
Okay. Well, Stephanie?
And with the Made in America thing, they won't like that way force the colonists to buy from the English companies. They want to go buy.
Okay. They are close.
Wool was a major export of Great Britain, of England, so they didn't want their colonies
Yeah.
getting in on their trade.
Yeah, from the English mindset, they were trying to enrich the homeland. All right, so they were wanting to not have the colonists become major competitors in the wool market worldwide. So this was aimed at protecting their market. Okay, one other one, the Hat Act of 1732. Hats aren't quite as significant today as they were back then. But this is really the same type of thing as the Woolens Act. It said they couldn't export hats. This is the colonists. And it also limited the number of apprentices a hat maker could have. What do you want to be when you grow up? I want to make hats. Well. Okay, and that was to protect the English hat manufacturers. They were wanting to enrich them. Really, England, all through here, they were applying mercantilism to enrich the mother country. They didn't think globally of the entire British Empire and the whole thing being enriched. They wanted the gold and silver back in England, and if some policy sent the gold and silver to the colonies, that was bad. And they were always wanting to get the gold and silver coming back to England. So they had all kinds of rules and restrictions like this. You can probably see how it chafed a little bit to some of the colonists. You know, and every time they turn around, there's some rule or restriction that was enriching the people in England. You know, what if you're a merchant bringing goods in, and there's all these requirements about sending things through England and on British ships. Right? What if Mr. Schrock said that, I don't know, what would be a good example? I was thinking putting one of you guys in charge of something, you know, get rid of the pot machine and have do you have a microwave still? Right. All that stuff was under the control of one person, I don't know, maybe Michael. And if you want to use those things, you have to get authority from him, and and he can charge whatever he wants. Okay. All right. You think this is irritating? Aren't we all in the dorm together? You know, and that's the way the college is run. Aren't we British citizens? How come they're picking out the merchants in England and trying to enrich them at our benefit or at our expense? All right, so a little bit of irritation here. So, okay, some examples out of England. Let's look quickly at some examples out of the colonies. The colonists, for much of the colonial era, were not against mercantilism. They were upset with the way England was doing it. They were all for things like the Woolens Act, but they wanted it to be, nobody outside the British Empire can do. They wanted to be included in the group that's getting enriched. So they were more upset about the way it was being applied than the general idea. So there's some mercantilistic ideas and laws that come up in the colonies. So here, let me give you some examples here. All right, often in the colonies, the colonial government would give a subsidy for certain things being produced. One example is Virginia promised or gave 1,000 pounds of tobacco to a company that produced 900 bushels of salt. They were trying to encourage the production of salt, not so much that they really liked salt on their fries, but if you think about no refrigeration and keeping meat from spoiling, there was a real need for it. So trying to encourage the production of salt, so they offered this 10,000 pounds of tobacco if you could produce the salt. Just in case the salt wasn't enough to preserve the meat, you could smoke it with the tobacco, maybe. I don't know. All right, so a subsidy, that type of a thing was done. Another type of thing that's got a different name, but very much the same type of idea, that often give out a bounty for certain items. The subsidies were kind of larger scale. You produce 900 bushels of salt, you get this 10,000 pounds of tobacco. These bounties were much smaller scale, and to me that's really the biggest difference. Maryland, if you produced a pound of hemp for rope, then you were given a pound of tobacco. Or if you produced a pound of flax, then you were given 2 pounds of tobacco. A little bit smaller scale, but that same idea. All these things aimed at encouraging manufacturing within the colony, trying to enrich the colony. Yes?
Who's buying all the tobacco?
The government. They have its deep pockets. Don't worry about that. We should worry about that. I really was about to say, this works as well then as it does today. Right? When the government meddles with the economy, it does not work. It never has worked. It never will work, despite what Obama says. Okay, so we had those bounties that were given out. Another three more things quickly as examples out of the colonies. Often the colonies would give a prize for the best product that was produced. Virginia had a prize for the top 3 pieces of linen produced every year. They're trying to encourage quality products being produced. All right, so that type of prize, kind of a county fair type awards, but with some real financial benefits on the sides. Okay, colonies also would grant monopolies, not a board game produced by whoever it is. What is a monopoly?
A large company that basically runs the whole market.
Yeah, there's only one producer in a certain market, so they would some product that they wanted to encourage the production of, they would go to one company and make it so they were the only ones that could legally produce that product. So Massachusetts did this with iron. The Braintree Iron Works were given a 21-year monopoly. They were the only ones that could produce iron in their colony. If you're thinking, wow, how does that encourage it? It doesn't, but don't worry about that. So. All right, and then the last thing I have here as an example is that the colonies would make, things that they wanted to encourage in their colonies legal tender. They would make it money. All right, I'll give you a list here, but if there's some product that they wanted to encourage the production of, they would make it money. So that legal tender means that people have to accept it. If the government said, spent 45 casings were legal tender, and you walked in to get gas with a basket full of spent 45 casings, they had to accept it. It was legal tender. They couldn't turn it away. All right, our money says legal tender on it. Have to accept it. So they would take certain products and make them legal tender. All right, I can give you a list. This is from Virginia in 1682. Flax, hemp, washed wool, tar, and lumber were all legal tender. So it gives new meaning to that phrase that money doesn't grow on trees. Money is trees. So,
What was number 4?
tar,
What was the last one?
lumber, boards, lumber, finished lumber. So they were wanting to encourage people to make these things, so they made them legal tender. I have no idea how the transactions took place. I don't know if you showed up with a trailer full of lumber at the grocery store. I don't know what you did, but they would make them legal tender to encourage the manufacturing. That'd be interesting. 10-page scientifically researched research papers. If the government said they're legal tender, they're worth $1,000. There'd be a whole lot of people downloading fraudulent research paper off eBay, off the online. There'd be all kinds of people selling them. I thought you had a question. Okay. Somebody have a question?
So if they did want the product that was given to them, would they sell it somewhat?
Yeah. It'd been cumbersome. Again, I don't know the mechanics of how these things worked out, but it made them legal tender. So, okay, all of these things fit into that very general realm of mercantilistic policies, government control over the economy. All right, never works. The free market is not only does it work the best, it lines up best with biblical principles of what the government should be doing. Okay, questions about mercantilism. Something even more exciting is next. All right, next topic. We'll talk here. Next topic is things that change the political thinking in the colonies. The colonists, especially by the time you get to the War for Independence, had a very different mindset than the British about things, about what the government should do, about rights being from God and that type of thing. Not that, a lot of it, they take ideas from England and the philosophers of England. In fact, some of the people who helped contribute this were British philosophers. But they had a very different idea. I once asked a professor at Hillsdale what caused them to make this change. He never really answered my question, but his answer was, I think I worded, what caused them to not evolve, but modify their beliefs. And he said that's really not the right word. They threw out the old beliefs from England, and they had some very new ideas about how things should work. I think at the heart of it is God and the Bible and the Great Awakening and the saturation that our country had with the Bible. And he didn't want to acknowledge that, but he dodged the whole question. But did make the point that they had a very, very different mindset. So, all right, 4 things here that I've got split up as to what caused this change, what gave them a very different outlook on the world and what the government should be doing. So, the first one I already mentioned is the Great Awakening. The Great Awakening. We talked about that last time and how one of the results was increased political freedom. I read you the quote by Coolidge, who pointed out that the religious Reformation that produced all forms of government, that religion was required to maintain them, and if we throw out that, we're going to lose it. All right, that it produced a completely different mindset about how things should be. Okay, let me give you two things here. The second one is a list of things, but 2 things about the Great Awakening that produced this change. The first one is ministers often took an important role in educating society about political affairs. They would preach about what the government should do or shouldn't be doing. It was they got involved. Not that they don't today, but much more seriously, ministers did this, and ministers were much more respected, and many more people went to church. So them teaching the Bible and applying it to government and what it should or shouldn't be doing, that affected things. So, all right, the second thing here with the Great Awakening is to give you some examples of how biblical thinking is very different from non-biblical thinking. So we'll contrast some things here and see how that when you accept the Bible and the basic teachings of the Bible, you get a very different view of the world than non-Christians. In my notes, I have pagan idea, Christian idea. Pagan is shorter to write than non-Christian. So pagan versus Christian. So, all right, pagan idea is this: that individuals only have value as they're able to contribute to the state. If you're not able to contribute, then you're not that valuable. If we have socialized medicine completely, and the government decides that you don't have that much life left in you that you can make a legitimate contribution to society, then they're going to decide to cut off some of your medical coverage because you can't contribute. That was actually Obama's reasoning. There was a famous incident where a lady asked him, this was in the second election beforehand when the Obamacare was in the works. She said, under your plan, basically, I think it was her mother, who was mid-70s or so, had a pacemaker put in. And she said, under your plan, would that be allowed? And he said, well, I don't know if it would be worth it. Okay, you could see his thinking. We're not going to waste the money on your mother because there's not that much life left in her. It's not worth that investment. He said it wouldn't be worth it. We might just give her some pain medication. That is a pagan idea. All right. Can anybody give me? Let me give you the Christian idea. Right? Is that individuals are of independent value. It doesn't matter how much we can contribute to the government and society. We are valuable, independent of all of that. Can anybody think of anything in the Bible that tells us we're important just because we exist? You can all walk out of here thinking, it doesn't matter if I fail, I'm important. Public school self-esteem class. So, yeah. We're created in the image of God. Yes. Okay. Who died for us? Christ. And does he say that he only died for those who can contribute viably to society? No, I mean, it's a very pagan idea. All right? We are valuable just because we exist. What's going to happen to every person when they die, regardless of how much they contribute to society? Well, there's two options, I guess. But yeah, they're all going to face God, heaven or hell. I mean, that's the eternal judgment or eternal blessings in heaven. All of us face that. So we're valuable just because we exist. It's not based upon how much we contribute to society. Okay, and as our founding fathers understood this, that they wanted to establish a government that recognized that people aren't important just if they're able to contribute. They're people. They have rights that are from God. All right, anybody recognize the phrase endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights? All right, they're saying this is stuff from God. It's not just because the government thinks you're important you get these. They're from God. Okay, so there's one example of how the biblical thinking or the Great Awakening here adjusted and changed the way they viewed government and what it should be doing. Let me give you another one. A pagan idea is that there's assumed and a natural inequality amongst men. Just we're not equal. Some people are just naturally the leaders, some people are naturally followers, just this assumed inequality. Christian idea or biblical idea is that there is equality. Now, the liberals like to run with that word and misapply it here, but equality, we're all equal before God. We're all going to face God the same way. We're going to be judged for whether or not we accept Christ as our Savior. Equality in that sense. We're not all equal in mental capacity or stature or beauty, aesthetics would be the right word there. Some are ugly and some aren't. And even that, I mean, everybody thinks they're pretty and everyone else is ugly, but even that's up for grabs. So, obviously not equal in those types of things, but equal before God, and here in particular, equal before the law. You know, we should all be treated the same way. Michael commits murder, he should be treated the same way as Jacob. Just with Jacob, we would, dance on his grave a little bit afterwards. But treated equally before the law. So, if you read some of the documents out of England, the Magna Carta and those types of things, there was not that equality. You can read in there, clergy were treated one way, the aristocracy and noblemen were treated one way, and the common people were treated this way. They have these differences built into the system. And that's not a Christian idea, and our founding fathers rejected that. So no, we're equal before God, all of us. So, all right, one more here. I kind of tripped up on this a little bit. Got ahead of myself. But anyway, the pagan idea is that freedom or liberty is the gift of the government. The government, a benevolent ruler gives you freedom to do certain things. And a Christian idea is that freedom or liberty is a gift from God. This is something God has given us. Okay, so the Great Awakening, it had a major impact into the way the colonists thought about politics and what the government should do and how it should be doing things. Let me read you a quote here. These are out of your textbook. Location 2748. I don't know what page that is. The essential difference between the American Revolution and the French Revolution is that the American Revolution was a religious event, whereas the French Revolution was an anti-religious event. All right, recognizing the very serious religious component to this. John Adams later said this revolution, talking about the American Revolution, was in the minds and hearts of the people and change in their religious sentiments of their duties and obligations. They're talking about the religious mindset that came about that caused a desire to have their political structure changed. All right, so the Great Awakening, major impact on the way the colonists thought and changed them even from the way England thought about things. All right, three others here. That was the longest if you're panicking about spending too much time on this. Three others. The second one is the writings of two different political philosophers, John Locke and William Blackstone. There's really a wave of these guys. I picked these two out because they're the most well-known, but they're John Locke and William Blackstone. Anybody know anything about these guys? More than what I just told you? Yes.
John Locke was from England.
Okay. John Locke was English, so was William Blackstone. Anything else?
I believe that William Blackstone wrote a book on law.
Commentaries on the Laws of England. Yes.
Didn't John Locke also write a book on economics?
I believe so. His most famous one is
Wealth of Nations?
no, that's another guy. It's a second treatise on civil government. I think there was a first treatise. The second one is more famous. So yes.
Did Locke say that the people were the key to the government?
The what?
That the people were the key to the government?
Maybe. I don't know that in particular. I don't know about that particular statement. But both of them talked about government and the people having the ultimate authority in the government. Blackstone, his commentaries on the Laws of England, that was the basic document for decades. People in America studied and understood Blackstone, and then they became a lawyer. And that was, if you could read and understand Blackstone, that was enough. Very, very influential there. John Locke talks about in a state of nature, if there's no government, it's every man for himself, and how there's no security there. If there's no government, the only thing that prevents me from taking Jacob's stuff is Jacob's guns. Okay, not these guns, Jacob. Okay, and really, as long as I think I can kill him and take his stuff, there's nobody to stop me. There's no security, and it goes from there to talk about how we form government structures to protect us, protect our things, protect our liberties, and that type of thing. So anyway, Locke and Blackstone, two political philosophers who contribute greatly. There are some others, but we can't list them all here. So, all right, third thing here that helped contribute to this change was Adam Smith and the Wealth of Nations. If you want to have a little short summary of what he wrote about, he attacked mercantilism. All right. attacked mercantilism, and then at the same time believed and described a free market system. Right? By attacking mercantilism, he was defending and arguing for a free market system, a free economy. And if I read much of The Wealth of Nations, it's really big. Okay, a little bit. I've not read the whole thing, so I've read about 100 pages of it. Really, if you ever, if you have a pickup truck and you have trouble in the wintertime, just throw a couple copies in the back and it'll give you enough weight. So, very big. But anyway, it was read by our founding fathers, and it really, it caused them to throw out that mercantilistic philosophy and want a free market system. Even at the time of as the Constitution is being written, people like Alexander Hamilton, who was the Secretary of the Treasury, he proposed a set of mercantilistic laws for America, and it gets rejected by Congress. And, they didn't want that. They want a free market system. So there's still that element there, but it's getting rejected as we found our country. So Adam Smith and the Wealth of Nations, that book is extremely important, not just for America's founding, but definitely important there. All right, and the last thing here, the fourth thing that caused this shift in thinking was that the colonies were self-governing. That might not mean a whole lot to you, but they had been running their government for a long time. That's a good example. I was talking to Jacob's dad recently. He was running a bus during the fall push. Does he still run the bus? He's been thrown out. So, anyway, it's one thing to think about what a bus captain should do and what things he should be concerned with. But all of a sudden, when you're the bus captain, wow, it changes the thing. Me and him talked about that a couple weeks ago about how you see things in a different light once you've actually run it, or if you've ever if you think of a business owner. I chuckle sometimes at people who don't run businesses that talk about all these stupid people that run businesses successfully. They've never done it. I mean, run a business sometime. I've never done it, but it changes the way you view things. All right, maybe the candy store is a little bit that way. The parents are concerned about the selling prices and all this kind of stuff. At the end, I'm concerned about how much profit the school makes. That's what I'm concerned about. If that number on the board is 600,000 and we don't make any money, I'm not really that happy. I want to make some profit. All right. So anyway, it changes the way you think about things. And the guys who wrote our Constitution and that led us into the war for independence, they had been running government successfully for a long time. They knew what they were doing, and it affected what they knew should be happening from England towards them. Right? They said, this is wrong. You shouldn't be doing this. All right, so it changed the way they thought. So much more of a practical sense here of them being used to the mechanics of how governments operate and how they can be abused. Is anybody in government class in here? U.S. Constitution? Right now? Okay. So we talked about the other day with there's some things in the Constitution where you can see these guys had a lot of just practical experience running governments and knew how government power could be abused. So there's lots of things built in the Constitution that ooze that type of experience. So, okay, so they were self-governing. They had been doing this for a long time. Let's see, one more example. Anybody ever been skiing, snow skiing? Imagine somebody coming up to you that's never been on skis, explaining how you should do it. So, well, you got to look at the idiot. Go try it yourself. All right, it's not as easy as it sounds. If you've done it, it gives you a whole different view. You can read about it and think, oh, this is not too bad, and then you actually get on the skis and or the first time you turn, because you're a rookie, they set the bindings so loose your foot flies out of the bindings and you fall over. All that stuff, all of a sudden you think about it, and it has a whole different, when you go back and read the description about how to ski after you've done it, all that stuff means completely different things to you, okay? And these guys had run governments before, so it wasn't just a class in college that they took. they had done it. So, okay, those four things changed the way the colonists viewed the world, and especially here, government and what it should be doing or should not be doing, how it should be doing it. It completely changed their mindset. Okay, questions about those four things? Don't even think about it. Just closing his notebook. Anybody still alive? Okay. Anybody still having conscious thought? I mean, you can be alive and not have conscious thought. So it's should we take a vote on that one? He claims he's thinking. So, all right, let's start into the next very broad topic here. We've been looking at for several class periods the colonial time frame, the French and Indian War, the colonial governments, mercantilism, just that whole time frame. The next topic we're going to look at here is the War for Independence. And we'll start looking at the things that lead up to that, and then talk about the war itself. All right, so I've got this next part, if you want it, just labeled Prelude to the War for Independence. So we'll talk about some of the things beforehand that lead us up to that point. Really, all that we've talked about, a lot of it is leading up and contributing, but we'll take the 10 years or so right beforehand and look at those in greater detail. All right, the first thing here in the prelude is George III, King George III. He was the king through this time frame. I just want to mention a couple things about him. First of all, he was a very controlling person. He wanted to control the colonies. He wanted them under his control. He was a very controlling person and wanted to consolidate power under himself. England, as a side note, they're in the process of going from an absolute monarch to what we have today. A very wealthy family who travels the world doing nothing but has no power. They were in that process, and he's in the middle of that, saying, no, I want control and power. So not that he still had real power, but they're in the middle of that fight here. So that kind of explains some of this controlling side of him. So, okay, another thing about him is that he was in the line of the Hanoverian kings, which were German kings. They were of German descent. He was the first one that was actually born and raised in England. The others were born in Germany and somehow inherited or married into or were the son of the previous king. He was born in England, so he was an Englishman, spoke England. The other guys spoke German for the most part. So here we had some German rulers. England was not their primary concern, so there was a lot of kind of ignoring the colonies, allowing them to do what they wanted, to now an English, somebody who was born and raised in England, ascending to the throne, and England being a real concern to him, and the colonies being a real concern to him. So, okay, and the last thing is he's king from 1620 to 1620 to 18, that doesn't make any sense. 1760 to 1820. Still a long time. He was in there. So he's in there prior to the War for Independence and for many years afterwards. And he does have serious mental problems towards the end of his reign. If you ever get to, decide when you're reincarnated what you come back as, don't pick a monarch in Europe, all right, for lots of reasons. But there's a lot of inbreeding. They didn't want to marry outside the family because it might diffuse the power, and it might be some other family now claiming that they had the throne. And so there were serious problems at times with some of those ruling families. Doesn't that sound exciting? Next time you read the book about the prince in the castle, just remember that the prince in the castle might have only had, 4 sets of great-grandparents or something. The lines went back like this. So. All right, George III, he's the king for this time. All right, next thing, Lord Grenville. Lord Grenville, he becomes the Prime Minister of England in 1763. And from that position, he becomes the primary person here directly dealing with the colonies and coming up with a plan and a scheme and things with the colonies. We're going to see that shift. After him, it goes to Charles Townshend, and then after that, it goes other places.
What was the date for that?
1763. I was going to ask, does anybody recognize that year? 1763.
The end of the Civil War?
Yeah, end of the French Indian War, the 7 Years' War. That was the end of it. That was the treaty, the Treaty of Paris of 1763. Yeah, that same year, he becomes the prime minister. We talked about another prime minister who comes up in the middle of the war that makes some changes that allows England to win. He comes along at the end. Lord Grenville. All right, let me try to give you the program that he came up with. Here we had England coming out of the French and Indian War successful. They had driven the French out of North America. They had all this land to deal with. They had the Indians to deal with. They had all this debt to be paid off. So he comes up with this plan to try to fix all these problems. And let me run down through what his plan was. We may not get to how the colonies react to it, but basically the colonists reject it, but we'll give you some details. All right, Grenville's program. The first thing was he wanted to rigidly enforce the trade laws. There had been trade laws there before. We talked about the Navigation Acts going back to 1651. There had been multiple ones through the years. They've been very loosely enforced, especially recently. All right. If you think back, we have 1760, middle of the French Indian War. We have a new king. We have the new prime minister, the new concern with the colonies there we talked about before. And this new king here, he's concerned with the colonies. He wants to make sure they're listening to the laws. They also wanted to pay off the debts from the war, but there was this renewed effort to enforce the trade laws. Here's a couple of stats that I think are kind of amazing. You don't have to necessarily write these down, but the law was at this point that tea going to the colonies had to go through England. And there was about 1.5 million pounds of tea consumed annually in the colonies, and it was estimated about 1/10 of it went through England. All the rest came in illegally, smuggled in. So we're not talking about a little bit here. We're talking about the lion's share of the trade ignoring the laws. And we're talking about a lot of money. This stat here is kind of amazing to me, and it shows you how quickly the colonies were growing. Is the imports to the colonies were more in value than the imports to Great Britain. If you think, just the amount of stuff going there that the people are going, there's more going to the colonies than are going to Great Britain. So we're not talking about a little bit of commerce. This is a major slice of the pie here. And for the most part, just the laws are being ignored. The government's not really tried to enforce them. And it's been a heyday there, and they're wanting to begin to enforce these laws. Okay, beyond that, let me just give you two things he did here to try to enforce these laws. One was he sent over a bunch of new customs officials. People actually living in the colonies, in these ports, inspecting the ships as they came in. Maybe this little side note here indicates how unserious they were. He made it so that the customs official had to actually live in the colonies. He couldn't live in England and be the customs official for Boston. He had to actually live in Boston. So, yeah. Oh, okay. So he sent over a wave of new officials to inspect and try to enforce the laws. And the second thing is he used a lot of the British Navy patrolling the waters off of the coast to also enforce this. He wasn't just waiting to catch them at harbor. They were stopping ships in the ocean, making sure they had followed the legal procedures and that type of thing. Okay, so rigid enforcement of the trade laws. All right, second one, Proclamation of 1763. What have you already seen from 1763? What's that? French Indian War, Lord Grenville coming to power. All right, this proclamation, up here you see the proclamation line. Well, if you can't, it's where the two different colors meet. I always get some girls to help me. Mustard yellow, dirty yellow, mustard yellow, I don't know. Whatever the difference is here. So, This is the proclamation line of 1763. That was drawn by this proclamation of 1763. What it said was the colonists could not go west of that point. All that land was reserved, or was cut off to the colonists. It was meant to be a haven for the Indians, etc. They were trying to cut off. Part of the thinking behind this in England was it would at least limit the contention between the Indians and the colonists, so that England would not have to have such a large military force here to handle those conflicts. All right, proclamation line of 1763. Can anybody think how that might be a little bit irritating to the colonists?
Didn't the charter for Virginia cover everything to the west?
Yeah, it did. The charters, most of them stated west kind of indefinitely, or to the Mississippi River or something like that. Okay, what else?
Fur traders.
Fur traders. That was cut off to them.
Wasn't there already large amounts of settlers in that area?
Not large amounts, there were a few. What had they just fought a war over?
And they just finished fighting off the French.
Over that land. Okay. And they win, and then England says, you can't go there. What did we fight for? What? You had us go out and die, and then you're not, it was the part of the victories of the French Indian War. So there were not a lot of settlers there. Matthew mentioned or brought that up. There were a significant number of people in the colonies that had bought land there. And all of a sudden it's cut off. George Washington had bought some land there. He was an evil speculator. Right? He was buying land in bulk, wanting to sell it off to settlers. These stupid little people that will, I'm kidding. It's not evil to speculate on that. But he had bought large tracts of land there, planning as the settlements headed that way to sell it off to settlers. There's nothing wrong with that at all. But there are people like that all of a sudden this is cut off. All right, so proclamation line of 1763, cut off all that land from the colonists. All right, we got to keep moving here whenever we're not going to get done. Sugar Act of 1763. This placed a tax. Can anybody guess what it taxed? Somebody who hasn't answered a question today. What was taxed by the Sugar Act? I don't think Miles has answered yet. There's a couple. Olivia. Who wants it? The next one might not be as easy. What was taxed? By the Sugar Act. What was taxed by the Sugar Act? Sugar. All right, it's a tax on sugar. All right. The product wasn't especially significant, but this is important. This was the first attempt to tax the colonists strictly for revenue. Right? There was fees and things with the Navigation Acts, but those fees mostly were to cover the cost of the inspections. This was just straight up, we're wanting to make money, pay this tax. That was a significant difference. All right. A significant difference in the minds of the colonists. All right, they were not against contributing fairly, to help the Navy that protected them from the French. So they weren't against helping pay for that. But this was just strictly for England to make money, and that was a point of contention, which we'll see in a little bit. All right, there's a few more things here, but we will have to save those for next time. Sorry to leave you in suspense. What else does Grenville do? And it'll be hard waiting. So you're dismissed.